Hey, third graders. We are going to be working with this chart today. And this chart has distances ran by third graders. So we have some third graders who ran part of a mile, and we have the fraction of the mile that each third grader ran. Before we get started, let's remember from earlier this week that equivalent fractions are on the same spot on the number line, and they take up the same amount of space. So we've been talking about equivalent fractions, and we've been proving that fractions are equivalent with our rectangle models and sometimes our circle models. So today we're going to use this chart, and we're going to look at the fraction of a mile that each third grader ran. We're going to start with Aaliyah. She was 2/8 of a mile. Caden was 3/4 of a mile. Briley, 7/8 of a mile. Rylan, 1/2 a mile. Jackson, 3/6 of a mile. Joseph, 1/4 of a mile. And Maddie, 6/8 of a mile. So the first question that I have for you about this chart is, between Caden and Jackson, who ran a longer distance, and prove your answer? So let's go back to the chart. We have Caden and we have Jackson. 3/4 and 3/6. Who ran a longer distance? So I'm going to move this out of the way. Hopefully you can see the whiteboard here. And hopefully this marker works. So we have Caden. Not very well. Doesn't work very well. 3/4. And Jackson was 3/6. So between these two boys, who ran the longer distance? Okay, we are going to look at our numerator. Our numerator is the same. We have 3/4 and we have 3/6. So we know that we have the same number of pieces. We have 4 as the denominator. So we're thinking about fourths for Caden, and we're thinking about a whole that has been partitioned or divided into 4 parts. Remember, a fourth is half of a half. So in your mind, think about if I divided this in half and then divided each half in half, I would have 4 equal parts. Well, Caden, his mile was divided into 4 parts, and he ran 3 of those 4 parts, or 3/4 of a mile. So we'll have Caden on top. Now Jackson, his mile was divided into 6ths, and he ran 3/6 of a mile. So remember what you know about fractions. The larger the denominator, the smaller the piece. So 3 copies of 1/6 is less than 3 copies of 1/4. So it looks like, judging by our model here, Caden ran a longer distance than Jackson. Do you agree? Okay, let's look at another one. Okay, our next question about the chart is, which third graders ran the same amount? Prove your answer using at least 2 different representations: number line, fraction models, words, or numbers. So look closely at the chart, and we're going to figure out which third graders ran the same amount. So looking at the fractions here, we have Aaliyah with 2/8. So I'm going to grab some fraction bars here for Aaliyah. She was 2/8. So that means if we had a whole and divided it or partitioned it into 8 sections, she ran 2 of those sections. So 2 out of 8. Caden, we've already talked about. He was 3/4 of that mile. And then we have Briley, and Briley was 7/8. So that would be 7 out of 8. And 7 is almost all of 8. So we know that's a big part of a mile. If she ran 7 out of 8, that means the whole is divided into 8 sections, and she ran 7 of those sections. So let's check 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. I need one more for Briley. I'm going to move this down a little bit. Move the whole thing here so you can see it. So she was 7/8 of that mile. I'm going to keep my hole up here just for reference so you can see it. Now, Rylan, he was 1/2 of a mile. Remember, when we take a whole and split it in 2 parts, that would be one of those parts. So there's Rylan. Jackson, we've already talked a little bit about. He was 3/6 of the mile. And then Joseph, he is 1/4 of a mile. Okay, he's just 1/4 of a fourth here. And then we have Maddie. Can't really see her right now. I'm sorry about that. She was 6/8. So let's get, 6/8. Whoops, I grabbed 6. Let me grab those. There's Maddie. She is 6/8 of the mile. So if you can see her at the bottom, I'm sorry you can't really see the names at the same time. So looking at these fractions, which third graders ran the same amount? So I'm looking very closely, and it looks like to me, it's easy to tell that Rylan and Jackson, they were tied there. They ran the same amount. So let's put them together. And then, we'll leave them together. Now, do you see another 2 students who ran the same amount? Look very, very closely. Do you see what I see? Are you seeing it? Joseph ran the same as who? Look closely. Who was it? Aaliyah. So I'm going to move those 2 together. Are there any other students who ran the same amount? Maddie was 6/8. Briley was 7/8. Those aren't the same. And 3/4 is not the same as 7/8. So Briley, I'm going to take your 8s off. I don't think you ran the same as anybody. You are on your own distance there. Now let's look at Caden and Maddie. I'm going to move Maddie's up and put them under Caden's. Caden was 3/4. Do they look like they're the same? 6/8 and 3/4 are exactly the same. So now we are going to prove that Aaliyah and Joseph ran the same distance, Rylan and Jackson, and Caden and Maddie. And we're going to do that by making some drawings. So get your pencil and paper ready. Okay, let's start with Aaliyah and Joseph. Aaliyah, 2/8. Joseph, 1/4. Now, I want you to go ahead and make 2 drawings, create 2 drawings to show me that you can prove that 1/4 is the same as 2/8. A rectangle model would be a very easy one. You could even do a circle model for this one or a number line model. Go ahead and try something. Hit pause if you need to, and then we'll check it together. Okay, my drawing looks a little something like this. I made my rectangle models, and remember, you can't just make 1/4 and 2/8 on your rectangle model. You have to draw the whole, partition it into 4ths, and then partition your other rectangle into 8ths. And to make our 4ths for, that was Joseph, Y for Joseph, we divided it in half, and then half of a half is a 4th, and half of a half is a 4th. 1/4, 2/4, 3/4, 4/4. Now, we continued that line down into Aaliyah's, first of all partitioning into 4ths, and then breaking each 4th in to 2/8. So that gave us 8/8. We shaded 1/4, we shaded 2/8. And that's a way to prove that 1/4 for Joseph is equal to 2/8 for Aaliyah. Now, I also did a circle drawing here. It's a little hard to see with my marker. I did label my fractional units, and I hope you did. I had a circle divided into 4 equal parts, shading one part. Then I had a circle divided into 4 equal parts, and then I halved each part, and that gave me 8 equal parts, and I shaded 2. So this shows us that 2/8 is equal to 1/4. They are equivalent. They take up the same amount of space. They are the same. And I'm going to show you that also using these circle models. And equivalent means they take up the same amount of space. And I'm going to layer them to show you that 1/4 is the same as 2/8. I could also do that with my fraction tiles. 1/4 is the same as 2/8. So Joseph and Aaliyah were equivalent fractions. They were tied. Now let's look at our next two. For the next two, let's look at Rylan and Jackson. Rylan was 1/2. Jackson was 3/6. So go ahead, boys and girls, and make 2 drawings to prove that Rylan's 1/2 is equal to Jackson's 3/6 of a mile. Go ahead and click pause and then get your drawings ready. 2 ways that you can prove this. I already have Rylan, and I've divided his line in half. We have 0 halves, 1/2, 2 halves. Now for Jackson, his is going to be a little bit different. He is divided into 6. He's 3/6. So if you remember, I'm going to divide this line in half, and I'm going to draw 2 lines on each side to make 3 parts on this side and 3 parts on this side, because 3 plus 3 is 6. That would give us 6 equal parts. So let's go ahead and draw 2 lines to make 3 parts here and 2 lines to make 3 parts here. And let's label 0, 6, 1, 6, 2, 6, 3, 6, 4, 6, 5, 6, and 6, 6. Remember, numerator and denominator are the same. It's the same as a whole. So I'm going to put a dot here on 3/6 for Jackson and a dot here for 1/2 on Rylan. And that's one way to prove that they are equivalent fractions. Another way to prove that they are equivalent fractions is to do the fraction box. I always love the rectangle model here. And hopefully I'll have room to write in the unit fractions. I'll do Rylan on top. I'm going to label it R and J. For Rylan, I'm going to divide in half. I don't have a lot of room to write, but I'm going to definitely label the fractional units. And then for Jackson, just like we did on the number line, I'm going to divide it in half and put 3 parts on each side, and that will be 2 lines. 2 lines here, 2 lines here, and then I'm going to label 1/6, 1/6, 1/6. A little hard to see, I'm sorry. 1/6, 1/6, and 1/6. I'm going to shade Rylan's 1/2, and then I'm going to shade Jackson's 1/6, 2/6, 3/6. And we can see that 1/2 is equal to 3/6. And remember, any fraction that has a numerator that is half of its denominator is going to be equal to 1/2. We are almost out of time. I don't have time to draw up Aaliyah's and Joseph's. The video is going to stop, but I want you guys to do that on your paper. Aaliyah was 2/8, and Joseph was 1/4. So go ahead and show 2 ways that 1/4 and 2/8 are equivalent.